being individual or collaborative. Now, in addition to that, Dave is also a thought leader on the impact of technology for higher education in the future. So you can imagine that he's in very high demand in these days that we are finding ourselves in. In fact, I just learned that this is Dave's 6th talk this week. So we are absolutely thrilled to have you here with us and really appreciate you making the time for us. And I'm going to turn not the floor, but the screen over to you. So welcome, Dave.
Thank you so much. I just want to encourage everybody in the belief that the number of talks I have this week is not related to how good I am at this, but just to my bad scheduling. But I am super happy to be here today. We're going to do hopefully a bit of an interactive chat. I'm going to see how comfortable we are with that here in a second. I will encourage you once again to use the chat room. While my French speaking is limited to the French school I went to, so if we want to talk about soccer, baseball, my French is very good, but my academic French is not great. But if you want to ask a question in French or write it in French, I am certainly going to be able to understand it. So feel free to use the chat room in either language. Please do toggle your chat room to all panelists and attendees in under 2 so that I can, so that everybody gets to see what you chat. Feel free to use the question and answer box by putting a question in. And we're gonna see if we can get some participation going right off the bat here. So before I even introduce myself, I wanna get a sense where you guys are. So this is what I call a live slide. So what I'm gonna ask you guys to do is actually write on this slide. If you go to your computer and you hover up to the top, you'll see something that says View Options. If you click View Options, you'll see another button that says Annotate. And what that'll allow you to do is write down what you, where you are coming from today. So I'm gonna go ahead and do the first one. I want you guys to do it too. We're gonna see if this works. Ontario. So I'm coming from Windsor, Ontario. So what I'm gonna ask you guys to do is go up to the top, hit View Options, click Annotate. You don't see it, Julia? Can be a problem sometimes. I found one of the things we all need to adjust to, we want to talk about COVID and the things that happen, is that sometimes things work and sometimes they do not. All right, so this has happened to me once before, and I appreciate that we're having a challenge. Oh, somebody found it. They typed in Montreal. You know what? Montreal, we've got another person from Montreal. Thank you very much. We've got some people able to use it and some people not. So you know what I'm going to do? I'm just going to say, I don't want to leave people feeling excluded. Let's just use the chat room. So tell me in the chat room, let's forget about writing on the screen, go right in the chat room and tell me where you are coming from today. So, oh, we're all from Montreal. Wow. Somebody's from Montreal. I think that's probably Montreal. Somebody from Longueuil. Excellent. Sherbrooke. All right. Ville de Québec. All right. Perfect. Thank you so much, everybody. I love to see the chat room go flickering like that. That's great. Thank you for participating. Toronto, currently in Ottawa. Somebody in my province. Excellent. All right. All right. Okay, good. So I'm going to go ahead and clear that off the screen. We're not going to use Annotate today, but you guys are excellent at using the chat room. So that's going to work out just great. Somebody stole my share screen, so I'm going to steal it back. That was clever, whoever did that. Okay, so first of all, who am I? Why am I here? So my name is Dave Cormier. That introduction from Marin was overly polite, but I will say that whether or not I'm doing this well, I've done it for a long time. So I started teaching with technology about 20 years ago because I had 275 writing students, and I have the organizational skills of a small rodent, which means I take pieces of paper and curl them up into little balls and stuff them into corners. And I didn't have, especially 20 years ago, the organizational skills to do it. I started using technology to help me out with that, to help organize the papers, and started realizing that there was some real power there that wasn't just about making up for my shortcomings, but was something that made the learning process a little bit different. And since then, I've worked in administration, I've worked in K-12, I've been faculty, I've done all kinds of different different kinds of things that have allowed me to see different sides of this issue. Where I want to start with this, when we talk about COVID and its impact on learning, and particularly as it applies to online learning, which is going to be sort of the scope of what I'm going to talk about today, is that this isn't a technology issue. If you're struggling with the technology, if you're having a problem with understanding how to use the buttons or press it like we did this morning, the technological problem, this is not the issue that you need to be worried about. Okay, that problem is something that you need to address, but it's something that you can fix on your own. It's something you can fix with practice. It's something that if you get involved in it and you go and you practice, you get it done, you will eventually come to understand how to use that technology. No, the thing that COVID has done more than anything else is made it clear to us that the process of teaching and learning has to change. And there's a couple of things that have influenced that change. There's a couple of ways in which, a couple of sort of things that the internet makes happen that do that. But to give you some context, I want to talk about the experience that doctors have right now. Last year, I was managing a medical school, one of the many different weird jobs I've had in education. And I spent a lot of time talking to doctors about the relationship between technology and their work. So right now, if you walk into a doctor's office and the doctor pulls out their cell phone to check it, you know, you've told them about what's wrong with you and you've given them a sense of what's going on, and they pull out their phone to check it, doctors get a lot of negative responses. People want to think that their doctors know the answers to their problems. They want those doctors to be able to come out with the issue right away. And didn't you go to medical school? Why do you need to check your phone to find out what's going on? At the same time, patients coming into the emergency room are coming in with their phones, already convinced they know what the problem is because they checked it up online, often, mostly wrong, but they come in demanding not only that they have a problem, but they tell the doctor what tests they want the doctor to perform on. So the technology has impacted us on both sides, right? We have this amazing amount of information available to us, too much for any doctor to ever know at one time. And the patients are coming in with their own access to this, a lot of it incorrect. The relationship between us and professions, the relationship between us and knowing has fundamentally changed. And I just encourage you to keep that thought of the doctor in your head as we go through this process and how their lives have changed, right? How their existence has changed and how their relationship to learning has changed. So no more do you go learn to be a doctor, read a paper every year and are done. There's constantly new stuff coming in and you have to change your approach towards what it means to learn. The digital is just different, right? The simplest sort of example that I like to use is this one here. So this is Control F. How many people know what this command means on your keyboard? So all I want is a yes, no in the chat room. Do you know Command F if you're on a Mac, but Control F? Yes or no, do you know what this is? I've been asking this question for 2 years now. Oh, yeah. Ooh. That's a lot of yeses. Oh, look at that. That's very interesting. Couple of no's. Right now, my non-scientific tally, and I've asked this question to over 1,000 people now, is about 60% of the people do know. Some of you may know what it means and not recognize the command. So it's how you find something, right? So if you look at the way that we used to, like a PhD student would be doing all the, like the index in the back of the book, you had to flip through the pages of the book to find all the instances of the word pumpkin. And then in the back of the book, it'd be like pumpkins on page 127 and 150. That could take months and months and months and months and months to do. And now it's totally irrelevant. You hit Control F, type in pumpkin, and the word pops up, right? So even at the simplest level, the digital is different. And at the simplest level of learning, the digital is different as well, right? So if you copy and paste, you know, we used to say as long as a student writes something down, at least they're processing something. That doesn't even happen anymore. I had a student that works for me yesterday say to me, look, if you ask me any question that comes out of a textbook, I have the answer already, right? It's one click and I have the answer to your question. If the question that you're asking is published at all, people can go find the question, copy and paste the answer and paste it in, right? That's just the world we live in. And I'm not suggesting this is good or bad. I'm saying that the digital has fundamentally changed our relationship to information, and it's fundamentally changed our relationship to knowing. So one of the words I'm going to use a lot today is the word complex. And just to sort of separate out how learning changes in this environment, I want to make this distinction with you. So for things that are complicated, if you look at this airplane, I don't want a single person on this floor to be creative. I don't want people trying something new. I don't want them exploring their inner selves. I don't want them figuring out how to put in a rivet better. None of that. There's a step. Maybe those steps are 1 through a million, but everybody needs to follow their steps. Are there different ways to build different airplanes? Sure. But in the process of building an airplane, we go step by step. And lots of learning is like that, right? There are lots of things we need to learn and do that have precise steps and steps we need to follow. So standard operating procedures, perfect, right? They're easy to measure. Sometimes more than one solution is possible. It's a step-by-step process. This information is available everywhere on the internet. If you're doing a presentation or you're teaching somebody and you're doing this live, I don't know why you would do that anymore. Far better off to just send somebody something. If it's memorized this step by step, there are lots and lots and lots of ways to do that, okay? Where this gets more complicated, where this changes is when we start to talk about complexity, right? There's a whole other cast of things that are complex. So if I asked you about this painting, I'm gonna give you a second. Look at this painting, and in the chat room, I want you to tell me, how is this guy doing? How is he doing right now? How is this going for him, and how is she feeling? Not good enough. She seems amused, maybe. A little wary, uncomfortable, trying to figure out how to be polite and leave. He's doing well. Totally different perspectives of this painting, right? Some people think he's doing a great job. Some people think they're in love. She seems a bit embarrassed. She looks slightly creeped out, right? How would we evaluate this scene? Are we going to agree in some way? We're not. And a lot of the things we do are like this. Anytime we start talking about ethics or political issues or any of these things, they're not right and wrong questions. They're not things that we have an answer to. Personally, I think maybe he should get that loot out of her face. Maybe he should stop touching her with his knee. Maybe he could have picked a place that wasn't in front of a number of saints. I don't know. Maybe that's an awkward place to do that in the first place. I don't know. Maybe the shoes. But there's no answer to this question. There's no, oh, these are the 5 things you should do to make her more comfortable. What do we know? It could be his breath. I have no idea, right? This is a 400-year-old painting. But it is a complex situation. And there are lots of things that we teach that are fundamentally complex. They're not directly measurable. There's no solution or definition we can give people. You can only ever work on part of the problem. I could help him with his outfit maybe, but what I would do wouldn't necessarily work for somebody else. But this is what teaching is all about. It is bringing your expertise to somebody's experience, right? It's even if what you're teaching is complicated, the reason you do it might be the complex part of that process, right? And it's bringing that context of complexity to teaching that is the most important thing we need to do right now. The digital allows for that complexity all the time, right? It doesn't matter what the issue is. You can go online and find the wrong way to do it, right? You can find the right way to do it. But because there's so much of it, we are constantly being confronted with complexity right now. That adds to everybody's cognitive load. It makes everything more challenging, but it also increases the possibilities we have. And again, I'm not saying this is good or bad. I'm saying that online has been like this for the 20 years I've been involved in it. And since COVID, we're all there now, right? And suddenly we're all in this position where we can reach out for different perspectives, whether or not those are right or not. Because we've moved from scarcity to abundance. Now that change has been happening for 20 years, but at this point, we're all there, right? Everybody has moved to the internet in one way or another. Certainly every professional, everybody with access to the internet There's certainly people with accessibility to the internet issues, and I'm certainly not suggesting we shouldn't do stuff for those people. I'm saying for those of us who are, we are now confronted with this abundance all the time. So if you look at how EdTech first started, this idea of technology and education, it was, Seymour Papert is really the founding figure here. And what he would say is, he wanted to create a machine that gave you the answer to a question. Does a giraffe, he had a little girl, he had this imaginary little girl who would ask the question, does a giraffe sleep lying down? And the knowledge machine would come up and say, yes, yes, the giraffe does sleep lying down, at least sometimes. That's not the internet we got, right? You don't go to the internet to answer a question. When you ask a question of the internet, you get 100 answers. You get things that are not answers. You get all kinds of other, you get that complexity that I'm talking about. You get an abundance of information now. And that abundance means that we can't control, once you lose, well, Illich would say, once a thing is no longer scarce, it can no longer be controlled, right? So much of what we do as trainers and educators now is less about giving people information the way a doctor would have 40 years ago, but rather helping them manage the information they're getting, just like doctors need to do now, right? We become people, we're no longer the authorities who have the answers. We no longer have that power of saying this is right and this is wrong, because they're 2 clicks away from another opinion. And if they come to us and we try to convince them and they find that other opinion, that may be wrong, and we haven't armed them with the tools for getting there, they're not going to be prepared for that. We can see that in our politics. We can see that in our response to COVID, where people are finding misinformation. And what we do is say, this is true, as opposed to giving people the details, giving them the whole context, right? And that is a scarcity response. We're in charge. We're going to tell you what the right thing is. Do this, right? But we don't have that control or that power over it anymore. You know, this is from 2010. We create as much information in 2 days now as we did from the dawn of man through 2003. That's a ton of information coming in for people who need the tools to be able to navigate it. And I'm not talking about this information abundance as a technology issue, right? Again, it's not a technology problem. It's a societal issue. So like when we talk about the novel, we don't say, oh, let's talk about the printing press. The printing press is necessary for the novel, but it's not the point. The same way here, the internet is necessary for the shift to complexity and abundance to have happened, but it's not the point. The point is the social implications of this, right? Our schools and our teaching have traditionally been this cone of artificial scarcity. I decide what I want you to learn. Here, read these 4 things, and then tell me what you saw in those 4 things. No, don't go get anybody else's opinion. Don't go look at, I'm gonna give you a test. Don't check your phone, right? Turn off your phones, turn off your computers. It's time for you to listen. We have this cone of control that we've created, but that control doesn't apply the moment any of those people leave your classroom, right? That model needs to change. We need to prepare them, not for waiting until they come back till we tell them what to know again, but for what happens when they go out into the world and are confronted by that abundance again, so they can make decisions when they're in complex situations. And our measurements are the same thing, right? We say somebody has passed, but by that we usually mean they've told us back the things we've told them to, right? Those measurements solve the problem of scarcity. So up till 30 years ago, 25 years ago, it was really, really hard to get information. And at this point, we flipped the script. Okay, so this was meant to be a write-on slide. I was going to get you guys to write on the screen, but since that created some problems, I'm going to ask 2 questions, one and then the second in the chat room. So this abundance of information for your environment, for where you work or what you teach, how has that abundance been a positive? How's that been good for what you are doing? Sorry, I have dust on my screen and the light's blowing on, I can't see. How has that been a positive? How has the abundance been good for your work? In the chat room. Find help resources. Yep. Allows me to choose what resonates in a local, oh yeah, for sure. It really helps adapt to context. That's true. Allows for more nuanced discussions. I can get the papers speedily. Yeah, I can get them back to me quickly. Access the diversity of information, for sure. Some good, some bad, but yeah, diversity of information. That's true. Vous pouvez l'écrire en français aussi, si vous voulez. Données probantes. Yes, we're always right there. I am more open-minded and less judgmental. Wow. Okay, yeah, for sure. When you see everybody's perspectives, you get that chance to be more well-rounded, right? Access to more tools. Innovation builds on ideas of others, for sure. Accès à l'info pour tout. Well, as long as they have the connectivity to the internet. You know, it's funny. On the first ever MOOC in 2008, in the second week, we had a gentleman who's now a friend, Viplav, showed up from nowhere. We didn't know this person before. And he said, you know, your perspectives are so Western. There's so much about what happens in like places like India that you're just ignoring right now. And he went off on us for about half an hour. He was totally right. It totally changed the way that I speak about my work. It changed the way that I think about the work that I do. And had it not been for the internet, that was never happening. Like I was never getting that global perspective and realizing just how close-minded, not intentionally, but just how close-minded I was. And I think that's a real advantage. If they're learning more about people who are different from them, who they might meet in real life, builds empathy and compassion. So that comment allows me to flip to the other side of this, which is what are the negative sides of that abundance? And I could rewrite Roxanne's comment saying the youth are having access to really dangerous and radicalizing content and people who are trying to convert them to some really nasty things, right? And there's people spreading misinformation in that way too. It is so easy to get lost. Yeah, I know for somebody like me who has attention challenges anyway, one click onto a Wikipedia page, I could lose 2 hours, right? And suddenly I'm reading about Roman history or something, and difficult to choose. You know what? Choice is such a big point of this. And I think like that's why we need to teach differently. We need to create choice. And I know that students hate choice. They do. We say they don't, but they really hate it. They want to be told what to do, but we've trained them that way. We need to give them those choices and teach them how to make them, right? So that when they get out into the world and they're confronted with choices, they learn how to do a good job to make those choices. Increases the need to make sure people know how to navigate and value. Yes, I 100%, I think of that as a positive, but removes anxiety of students. Yeah, it says made people complacent in recognizing that there are people to help who do not know how to do things. That's a deep comment, Jonathan. I'm gonna have to think about that for a second. Abundance has made people complacent in recognizing that there are people to help who do not know how to do things 3 steps before their basics. Oh, I see. I see. Right. So I'm gonna riff on what I see Jonathan saying here, and I apologize, Jonathan, if I've misunderstood, but there's a lot built into that sentence. One of the challenges with internet, particularly communities, is that they build so quickly that if you miss the first 3 months of that community building, it's very difficult for people in that community to explain the basics to you for you to be able to include it. They set the bar high, not intentionally, but because communities build so fast, they harden really quickly. And sadly, and this is the truth of community building always, is that communities often build themselves by choosing a them that they aren't, rather than an us that we are. And that makes it really, really difficult for people to explain things to other people. Yeah, de confirmation, confirmation bias. Oh, I love that. I love the bilingual sentence there. Confirmation bias, that is, I only look at the things that agree with me, and therefore I'm right, definitely. And it's easy to find those kinds of groups. It's made people complain. Okay. All right. Thank you very much for the feedback there, folks. I really appreciate your input, and I see that the overwhelming, and maybe that comment is the perfect one for us to move forward on. Because what I want to talk about today is some ways of talking about that overwhelm and about how we can design. Oh, I see. That's right. So some people are seeing the comments because they're set to all panelists and attendees. And if you're typing to all panelists, then we can't, then not everybody can see your chat. So I'm responding to people who you can't see the chat of. I apologize. Thank you for noting that, Yannick. No, Jonathan, you're doing a good job. That was a great question. Okay, so complexity and abundance changes the challenges and the opportunities that we have, right? So because of that abundance and because of the complexity that comes with it, right, it changes what our opportunities are. So when we talked about, you know, have more access to different information, more different perspectives, but then also the challenges as well, where we have, you know, overwhelm and misinformation and confirmation bias as well. So it changes the order, right? And add in that there's a lot going on, right? You know, people are living in their houses in ways they haven't before. I just chased away my child who was playing like a metal ball clinking game in the next room, even though I told him like 40 minutes ago that I was doing a talk, and they've never played that game before. Like, I don't know why they chose today. This is people's lives, right? This is where we are. We have all these little added moments of stress that come into our place. And some people's lives are a lot more challenging than that, right? This is an authentic shot from my partner's classroom, okay? The guy who took this picture, it was his day for presentation, and his landlord had sent in the construction crew to replace his kitchen while he was doing his presentation, right? People's lives are kind of messed up right now, right? That adds all of this other baggage, right? So I try to keep reminding when people are snapping at me or whatever else that this is happening to people and they can't even get out of their houses, right? And people's social communities have been messed up. Yeah, there's a lot going on right now, and it is difficult to get people's attention, right? Let alone things like the American election. Like, how much time did I spend refreshing my computer? I don't even live in that country. Anyway, you guys know what I mean. You all feel the same way, I'm sure. And people's systems are messed up, right? So it may be your work and the system that you work in. I know in our schools, I think of some of the mistakes we made with COVID. You know, I've been talking about online learning for a long time. But suddenly people are listening in ways they weren't before, right? So when I told a group of people, hey, you could try this or whatever, I could expect that, you know, 20% of the people would try it. And that was my habit. But now everybody does it because everybody has to use the online internet thing. And so we have situations in programs where the student has got the same icebreaker happening in 5 straight classes, because all of the same faculty in the program attended one of my workshops, and, you know, they're getting the same assignment over and over and over again because the systems just weren't built to handle the change that we're making, right? And it's the same anytime anybody's going to training, going to work, their systems are messed up, right? They feel kind of uncomfortable because they're not what we're accustomed to, right? And here's where we start to move towards the equity and the sort of diversity issues inside of this. So that to me sets the context of the digital. And then the question becomes, what do we do about it? And the first point I'd like to make is that the different is different, right? So the challenges that somebody has in a face-to-face classroom, whatever their learning challenges are, have now become different. They, in some cases, they're actually better. So if your challenge is that you have a lot of face-to-face anxiety, the move online is actually helpful, right? That's actually an improvement. If you have, if you can't, a simple example, look, and it's not even, if you can't type, your life just got a lot harder 8 months ago, right? Just being able to type in an online class, for instance, it's a huge advantage, right? People's ability to maintain attention are very, very different when they're by themselves in a room than they are online. So all of these things, so even people who had challenges, those challenges are now different. They're unfamiliar, right? And people are not going to have the tools. Even people who are super aware and well supported are not necessarily going to have the language they need to explain what challenges they may have, right? So we were all different before, but now we're differently different, right? So we're added, when you add the complexity and the abundance and the fact that our worlds are weird and that our difference is different, we're walking into a situation where there is just an awful lot more complexity than there was before. Okay, so from your perspective, where does your overload sit right now? What is the thing that's overloading you the most? Like when you feel that, because to me, that's what COVID is about, right? Is the overload and the changes that are happening. So in the chat room, what does that overload feel like for you? My overload this week is Zoom meetings nonstop. Are you kidding? You know what's funny about that? There are companies now that are mandating space between meetings. Microsoft is mandating a start and end time of the day when people would normally be commuting. They're meant to have a half an hour at the start of the day and a half an hour at the end of the day that they commit to non-communication, to have that commuting time built into their day, even though they're at home, right? Working at a distance, travaux et examens, correction, oh, the corrections, oh, that's always terrible. Not having the ability to focus, too many interruptions from my children, my husband, I used to being in my home office alone and quiet all day. All these other lovely people are in my space. Yeah, no, it's just, it's another piece of the puzzle, right? The discipline is a tough one. Work in the same place that you chill. I have like 5 places in the house that I work and I try to move between them. It helps me focus a little bit. And I've said that to other people and they're appalled because what they're looking for is consistency because we're all different, right? Sharing workspace and whatnot, disconnecting from home to school, finding the motivation. Well, Jean, I'm very happy you found the motivation today. I appreciate your wherewithal. Oh, wherewithal. How do you say that in French? I handed one off to the translators that time. Sorry, guys. You're doing a great job, I'm sure. I know I'm talking too fast. I apologize. If any of you folks in the French side of this could say thank you to the nice translators for me, that'd be great. I wonder if they tried to translate that. Okay, sorry, I'm being a bad kid now. All right, so trying to engage students in online meetings after school. Oh man, that's a tough one. So my kids are in theater and now they're doing theater online, right? And keeping that engagement is really tough. You know, going places is a really important part of the process. I was talking to some folks at the CMHA, Canadian Mental Health Association, a couple months ago, and they were talking about how much harder it is to connect to people inside their homes because getting out of their house in some cases where people aren't safe for a variety of reasons in their house, getting out of their house is a really big part of what makes their program work, right? So that's a big challenge too. Okay, thank you for sharing, for those of you who did, and for those of you who are having other challenges, I wish you the best. Okay, so our response to this can be one of 2 things. We can try harder, right? And even though we're more worn out, and I've seen so many people do this, they try harder and try harder and try harder to connect, try harder to engage, try to do more of what they were doing before. Or you can change your approach. And my suggestion is obviously going to be change your approach. So the formal way of talking about this is universal design for learning is what I would propose for people. It's about differentiation. It assumes that people are different, right? If you try to bring all of that difference in everybody's different lives into one lane, and you expect everybody to do the same thing, you're pulling people from their normal comfort spaces into your space, right? Different approach to that is to say, oh, I accept that everybody's different. I take it as given that everybody's different. I take it as given that all your situations are different, that you're facing challenges. So I'm going to give you ways to work from your perspective. Maybe it's easier for you to write me something. Maybe it's easier for you to talk through it. Maybe it's easier for you to submit at a different time, right? That flexibility and that allowance for context is key. So present the information in different ways, stimulate people in different ways, and allow people to have both for the super goal-oriented people, having a way to approach them, and for the people who are more like me, who are a little bit more chaotic, have a way for them to work as well. Creating that difference into your process. And 90 minutes is not enough time for me to explain the entirety of UDL for you. So built into this, I have a couple of sort of bigger resources, and that link on the bottom of the page, take a tour of UDL, will allow you to dig a little bit deeper. And you're welcome to these slides after. I have a deeper slide later that we're not gonna be able to go all the way through, but it's another one that'll give you some context if that's something that you're willing to explore. The point is that you're designing to include everybody, right? You're designing, instead of designing for the one path, you're designing knowing the difference, accepting the difference, welcoming the difference as a strength, right? So as we talked about earlier, that abundance of perspectives is actually the thing that allows us to think better. And I forget who said it in the chat room, but you know, suddenly I'm less judgmental because I accept that there are a bunch of different ways to see something, right? We all have different educational backgrounds. You know, I taught educational technology to teachers for years. You know, you have some people who walk in the door who you have to walk over and help turn on the computer. And then I've got engineers in the same class, right? Everybody comes in with a different background. Now, it turns out that I've often had more success with the people who had never touched a computer before than the ones who thought they knew what they were doing. I don't see necessarily that as a ranking system. It's just difference. So just look at the middle one for a second. The different attention spans. As I told you earlier, I definitely have some attention issues. I'm sitting on a rocking stool, desperately trying not to show you that I can rock back and forth in my chair like this. Whee! And I'm half standing up. This really works for me. It allows me to have just that little bit of shifting twistiness to keep myself focused. We all have different attention spans, right? Some people like to do small blocks of work. Some people like to do large chunks of work. Am I suggesting that we shouldn't have people learn how to do certain, like how to write an essay? Maybe, but that's not the point. The point is to build the flexibility into what you're doing. There is no need to have one outcome to the process, right? So this is the bigger chart that I was talking about. It sort of talks about the different kinds of approaches that you can take, the different questions you should be asking yourself. And it kind of gives you a sort of a guide to get you into the UDL world, right? But the point here that comes out of UDL is that it's about there being multiple ways of doing things. Broadly speaking, this is what we're talking about. So if you're interested in getting into that formal UDL piece, I heartily encourage you starting from this piece and then moving forward. It's just about choice. We talked earlier, and some people were saying earlier, that choice is both the positive and the negative of this abundance and complexity. And it is both a positive and a negative, right? Which is why we need to build it in. We need to build it in both because it's ethical to do so, right? To allow people to work from their own difference. And that's the UDL perspective. But the perspective that I'm offering to you is that there's another reason for doing it. It's because we desperately need to, right? Because it's the world that people are facing. When we have people who are going out and saying that COVID is a plot by the government, one, they credit the government too much, as if the government could put some kind of conspiracy. I can't even imagine how you would make that conspiracy work. But it's because people don't have the tools to judge the things that are in front of them. They look to a person of power who tells them one thing and they believe it. Unfortunately, some people look to the wrong people in positions of power. And that's not what we need people to do. We need people to look at issues and think about them and understand them in their complexity, right? And I mean, I can't imagine a better example than the mask debate. Are masks perfect? No, they're not. Do they help? Yeah, they do. But it's not a yes or no issue, right? Are there ways in which? Of course there are ways. But we need to confront that complexity, confront those issues. Anik, good luck with your teaching today. I appreciate the fact that you like the presentation, and hopefully we can talk again some other time. I hope you have a great day. Okay, so that's one way of looking at it. I'm going to give you a simpler perspective than UDL. I hardly encourage you to dig into UDL. There's a lot of really good stuff there. But my translation is simple. I think of it as pedagogies of care, right? And this expression comes to me from a great researcher from Egypt. Her name is Maha Bali. I encourage you to find her and see her work. It's really good. But if the UDL piece is too sort of technical for you, as it often is for me, and want something a little bit closer to the ground in order to apply this sort of equity and diversity to your process, then I encourage you in thinking about it as pedagogies of care, right? The first thing you need to do, thinking about pedagogies of care, and it's interesting that somebody came up with this in the chat room too, sorry. You need to think about your own practice. You need to be self-aware. You need to think about it from your perspective, right? Why do I teach this way? Why do I feel like my students need to give me the right answer? Why do I want them to obey? This can be hard for a lot of people. Like in the last 8 months, I've trained hundreds of faculty. And this is a realization that it's hard for people. I was taught this way, I'm gonna teach this way. You know, I need to prepare people for the real world, but then the world's not like that anymore. So what are you preparing them for, really? You know, that nervousness that comes from not knowing what a student is gonna do. It's growth mindset, thank you, Alan. That nervousness of not knowing what someone's gonna do. You know, okay, I'm sorry, I'm gonna tell another story. You can tell by the grayness in my beard that I like to tell stories. I find that the more gray there is here, the more I wander off into storyland. But I was teaching, I was teaching the teachers of teachers. So I was teaching teacher trainers. Sorry, I don't know how else to say that. I was teaching teacher trainers a couple of years ago in the K-12 system. Fantastic group. You know, you've got a group of 7 or 8 people, and you've got a lot of time. It was a great experience, but the start of it was a little rocky. What I had done that day is I walked in with a bunch of electronics equipment, knowing these people didn't know how to use it. It was simple enough, but I knew they didn't know how to use it. And I walked into the room and I dropped the technology on the table, the little bits of things on the table. And I said, go. And then I walked out of the room for 15 minutes. And I walked down the hallway and I grabbed a coffee and I forced myself not to go back to the room. You can imagine when I got back to the room, absolute pandemonium. What was I doing? What is going on? People are yelling. They're all mad at each other. Some people are trying to do it. Other people are saying, don't do that. He didn't give us any instructions. What are we supposed to think? And the leader of the negative band was looking at me and saying, well, I'm just not going to do it. I don't know why I would do this. I don't understand how this is valuable to me. And I looked at her and I waited. You know, sometimes you try something as an instructor and you hope it's going to work. But so that's what's going on in my head. I'm like, just be patient, just be patient. And she stops and looks at me and goes, oh my God, I'm the person who teaches growth mindset for the system. I don't have a growth mindset myself. Did that just happen? And I'm looking at her, I'm like, oh my God, it worked. So my internal educator is doing a little happy dance, but I'm trying to keep my face straight, right? But it's really easy for us to talk about other people having a growth mindset. It's very difficult for us to apply it to ourselves. And Jane, who is this person, literally her name is Jane, who is an amazing educator. It was a magical moment for her. It was a moment where she realized that she had become very, very comfortable in her professionalism, right? And what COVID has done for a lot of us is threatened that feeling of comfort, right? Because suddenly we're being asked to do things differently. And if we're going to do things differently if we're going to expect our students or our participants or our learners to do things differently, we need to do that self-awareness for us to be willing to be different as well, right? It's an important piece of the puzzle. Julia, I appreciate your smirk in the chat room. Okay, so in terms of showing care, I love these cows so much. In terms of showing care, there are 4 pieces of advice I have for you. One of them is to show care in your design. So a colleague of mine says, keep things simple, keep them equitable, and keep them engaging. And they're simple words, but there's a lot behind them, right? One of the things I've been encouraging everybody is to go through what they teach and ask themselves, do I really need to say that? Do I really need to do that? What is the key? What is the absolute most important takeaway? What is the deep, complex thing that I really need people to think about? What's the important thing here? Not what fills up a 2-hour lecture, not what fills up a 3-hour seminar, right? But what are the important pieces we really need to get to? Keep it simple in terms of what you're trying to get people to know. Don't take anything you can take out, anything you can get rid of. Think of that person in their house with the contractors tearing apart the kitchen, right? Everybody's living with all this stuff right now. Like, I forget who said it, but it's hard to convince ourselves to go to online training right now. It's hard to put aside the time to do it. Make that time the most valuable time you can. Make it as focused as it can be, right? Keep it equitable. And that's where that giving people different ways of performing, allowing that flexibility, trying to understand where people are coming from, making that design as multiple as it can be, right? And keep it engaging. You know, I literally was talking to a faculty member 2 days ago, and I have this thing I'm doing where I'm having faculty talk to students who have taken their course before, just kind of high stakes, but really trying to expose what the student experience really is like. And she goes, well, those are the boring chapters. I just try to suffer through those. And I'm like, no, you kill your learners when you take that perspective. I don't care what the material is. You need to imagine that people's time is valuable and that them being there is important. Somehow you have to find a way to make that work. Just don't give up on it being engaging, I guess is what I would say. And if you're going to ask people to be synchronous, if you're going to ask them to come and meet you live like this, there has to be a reason for that experience. They have to have a way to engage. I wish I was able to engage you guys a little more, but with the short time, I'm hoping the chat room gives you some feeling of that engagement. The write-on slides are really cool. I'm sorry we weren't able to do that, but you need to find a way to build that into your process. You just have to embrace the complexity, right? All of that, what I just said, creates a whole bunch of complexity. You know, you'll get an assignment from a participant and it will be not what you wanted at all. And you're gonna have to go back and go, yeah, we're gonna have to talk about that, right? Whereas if everything is rigid and organized, you know what you're gonna get, but it's not realistic, right? It's not in the times we are. It doesn't give people that room for flexibility. It doesn't allow for those things to develop that way. This is a bit more, I give this to you guys as a conversation, not because I know that it's a good idea or anything like that. People in my field would tell you that creating shared space for learners is really important. And I think it's true. So I think we'd all agree that the hallway of a conference, the 5 minutes before the conference starts, the 20 minutes after the session, are some of the most valuable pieces of learning that we have. And that casual time with each other, that interstitial time, another word I'm tossing over to the translators, oops. That interstitial time can be some of the most important and also some of the most difficult to replicate online. So any way you can create that space, whether it's by creating like good breakouts for people to talk, or it's about organizing time for them to have that informal coming to know. Having that time to know is, sorry, I just got a chirp from one of the translators. That's awesome. Is really useful for students. It is community building. It's good for the soul. It's hard to do. So when I say you should think about it, I say it with caution. Some people have been successful with this and some people really haven't. But where you can, you know, there are lots of places that can happen, and I encourage you to give them a shot. Okay, so the second piece of this is showing care in your habits, just in the way you do things, right? So I want you to imagine, and I'll get you to pop in the chat room. If you come into a session, or you're training something, or you're going into a room, or whatever you're in charge of, what are the things you do in the first 5 minutes? Then you walk into a room. If you close your eyes and you imagine the first 5 minutes of a session, I walk into the room, I go, hi, I smile at people, right? I might, if it's a group I see all the time, I might check in on somebody I know is having some challenges. I look around the room to see who's asleep. I look around the room to see who is making eye contact. I look for frustrations. What do you guys do when you walk into a room? What are those interstitial pieces? What are those first 5 minutes of things you do in a seminar that you're teaching? What do those look like? Just drop them into the chat room for me. You smile, you say hi, answer maybe a question or two relating to the previous week. Thanks, Julia. Anybody else? What are those things that you do, that you build in? Salut chaque personne qui entre. Yeah, I say hi to everybody. Greet students. And the energy level is a big piece. Give them time to adjust and greet each other. Chit chat. Yeah. All those pieces. You got to find a way to do them. I set up, I install, yeah. Set up my space to be comfortable. That's another good one, right? When we're working online, we need to find these places, find these social cues, find these ways to make sure you're smiling at people, ways to make sure that you're delivering your personality, whatever that happens to be. I'm not suggesting that everybody needs to do this the same way, but those parts of being human, right? Oh, there's a cutie in the camera. Hello, cutie. Sorry, somebody's video is on and there's a child. I'm distracted easily. I certainly don't mean you need to move your child. You go ahead. Those little moments are really important ones. Just that one. Like, I recognize that somebody's got their child in there, and it's totally okay, right? And making people feel okay in your space, making them feel comfortable, is that human thing we still need to do. And it's hard sometimes because you're nervous, or you're worried, or you're trying to get the technology fixed. You're trying to remember where the button is, or if you're me, you're trying to remember to hit record, right, Yannick? So all of those pieces are easy to get focused on and forget what you're actually doing there, which is to try to create a connection with people so that they feel comfortable with you and they feel like this is going to be worthwhile them setting aside the time to come and do this, right? And it's about building that presence across everything that you do, right? So yes, there's the first 5 minutes of class, there's the smiles, the time for chit chat I think is really important, encouraging students to come 10 minutes early, and then having a casual conversation with people before the start time. But everything we do needs that presence, right? So one of the things I tell faculty all the time is, if you're going to send somebody an article, a student an article to read, tell them how you felt about it. Say, if it's a difficult one, say, look, I had to read this twice the first time I read it. I really think you're going to need 2 reads too, right? The middle part of this gets really hard. Just be patient with it, right? Just those little notes of encouragement, those little places where you insert your personality, right? Where your personality becomes part of the learning process. Because the content is available on the internet already. They can just go search for it. It's your presence that's important. It's your personality, it's your expertise, it's your experience, right? Those moments that you probably would do face-to-face anyway. You would include the story. You would include the sidebar about the article, but online we tend to forget them, right? We miss them sometimes. We miss bringing our humanity to the conversation. So I encourage you to build that presence, your presence, in all of those places. So I also encourage you to show your connection, your care in the connections that you're making as well, right? So, and this maybe is how it comes to. So we send a message to all students, and that's great. I mean, I think it's really important for us to have that moment where we have the start of every week if we're teaching a consecutive class, or a week before if we're teaching a seminar or whatever, where we reach out to people and say, hey, this is going to be coming. This is how you need to get ready. But everybody's coming from a different place. You need to think of every person. So for instance, when we talk about online learning, one of those key places is explaining to people how to interact in that space, like what it looks like to interact effectively. What does it mean to be successful, right, in that environment? What does it mean? I'll tell another story maybe. One of the things that I learned in the medical school is most doctors are children of doctors. I had no idea how often this was true, but I started asking around, and over again, the doctors I was talking to were the children of doctors. I don't know if it's how they get into school or what the deal is, but it was a pretty common event. So I was talking to one of our faculty at the medical school, who was saying that they were really frustrated by students who didn't get dressed right to come to the hospital. And I said to her, did you tell them how to get dressed? Well, no, you should know, it's common sense. And I said, well, tell me a little bit about your background. And again, it turns out both her parents were doctors, and she was brought up inside of this environment. She saw her parents go to work in a professional environment every day. She saw what she was supposed to do to be a doctor. And it had never occurred to her that some people didn't grow up that way. Some people were different. Some people had different backgrounds and different experiences that led them to not know how to interact properly. And an online environment is no different, right? I know I have a lot of people that I work with who are really frustrated by the ways students interact in online environments. And, you know, I always ask the same question, did you tell them? Well, they should know. No, they don't. Nobody knows. Nobody knows how we're supposed to interact with each other in online. I mean, we've all been on Zoom for 8 months, but what's the best way to ask a question? What's the best way to interrupt somebody? Do I need to have my camera on all the time? Should I use the chat room while other people are speaking? There are no hard, fast rules to this. Certainly, I would suggest that ethically, we shouldn't force people to have their cameras on. You know, some people's houses have construction going on. You know, some people have uncomfortable parts of their lives that they don't want to show you, right? And that's real in their lives. And normally they'd be leaving that behind to come to your classroom. Now they've got to take that with them. So I would say, you know, ethically, every person is different. You need to deal with every person in a different way. It can be exhausting. You know, and if you've got 300 people in a classroom, it can also be impossible. So even where you can't do it for every person, you can at least remember that there is an every person. And that's really the core of this whole thing, right? Things are harder. There's more to know. And that can be good, and that can be bad. We're all different, but we're different. And that means we just have to be more patient with each other, be more patient with our students, understand they're coming from different places. I'm not saying that we shouldn't have expectations of people, right? I expect any participant in something I'm doing to work. What I try to do is allow them to work in ways that work for them and not necessarily just ways that work for me. Just a couple of comments. I try to never assume that students know what's in my head. Yeah, It's hard. It's hard, right? And again, what's in your head and the way you would normally explain it, right, in that environment. So for instance, how do you deal with people who are monopolizing a conversation, right? In a face-to-face classroom, if I saw a person, often white, male, old person, not necessarily, often, monopolizing a conversation, I might stroll over to that table and look at that person, wait. And if that doesn't work, I might take that person aside and say, hey, you know, there are a lot of different perspectives in this conversation. It might be useful if the next time you listen to some of them. I don't think I put it that way, but you know what I mean. I would probably say it nicer than that. That was my internal voice. Shut up. But we have those sort of tools that we use in our face-to-face classes that we need to develop online, right? We need to be able to do those interventions. We need to be able to spread that out. Coming from a culture of consent, I find it hard to force adolescents to put their camera on, but it's so hard to speak to some loyalty in them. Dude, I totally get you. You know, and when we're talking about adolescence here, I think there's another important point to make. One of the things that we've discovered, I mean, I guess we kind of knew, but it's certainly come to the foreground here, is that young people have no idea how to use the internet. They really don't. And they particularly don't know how to talk by voice to other people on the internet. There's some good reasons for that. I don't know a 15-year-old who would call someone on the telephone. They would text them, and if they had to call them, they would probably text them 4 times first. It's just polite, right? You don't just call somebody. They might be interrupting them. Why would you call them? You text them. That's the code of ethics for the use of a telephone. If I get a phone call on my phone from somebody, I have a guess for how old they're going to be. They're probably going to be my age or older. I would never get a phone call from my 14-year-old. They would text me, and I would text them back. And if we really needed to talk, there might be a phone call. But take that reality and move it to an online learning space. And then imagine forcing those people to be in a video chat with somebody they don't know already. Right? It's just an experience they've never had. And we have this idea that because they're young and they know the technology, that they're going to be useful in those spaces, but they don't have those tools. They don't know what they're supposed to do. They don't know who's supposed to start talking. You have to build a lot of scaffolding around those environments. And then when I said earlier, you've got to sort of look into yourself, you have to have that self-reflection. I know that one of the biggest challenges people have is looking into that little tiny black box, right, where the video camera is, and trying to imagine that there are 40-some people over there, and that you're real people, and that you're listening, and then it's super important that I keep you guys engaged, right? Keeping that in mind can be super hard, right? The extraneous cognitive load, so much cognitive load, so much. Increased fun, the use of chat rooms and online avatars that do body motions of the room. Yeah, that can be good. That can also run you into trouble in terms of those body motions. So it's a complex situation. Anyway, the point that I'm making here is that you need to be clear. You need to imagine for every one of those people, not just the explanations that you need to be effective in those environments, but the explanations that everybody needs, right? Trying to work your way through what those differences are. This is a totally, that's really, I hope it's not as blurry for you guys. This is a totally not scientific poll that is something I'm breaking in this very environment. But I asked my Twitter followers, when teaching synchronously, what is the maximum amount of time you should be talking without some kind of student interaction? Now, again, it's not a scientific poll, but those are all educators, and that's the sense they gave. I thought it was super interesting. Those every people who are out there are doing all kinds of different things, and you do an awful lot to keep them engaged in the process. But the last point, and this is where I'm going to finish off, we should have about 15 minutes for Q&A if you guys have any comments or thoughts you want to share in addition to what you've done in the chat room here, is you need to show care to yourself. For all of the things that you can do for other people, if you use up too much of yourself, you're eventually going to run out. Can't pour from an empty cup, right? you need to always, you can't just do more. You can't just try harder, right? At some point, there has to be a limit to what that looks like. And, you know, my experience is, and I don't want to make this sound too Pollyannish, but my experience is that the people who come to seminars and sessions like this are amongst the best of the people in the education field, or in whatever specific area of this field you're in. The people who don't care don't attend online seminars. So you're the ones who are going to try too hard. You're the ones who are going to answer emails at 2 o'clock in the morning because somebody emailed you and you got to get back to them right away. You don't. You really need to put structure around how much of yourself you can give to any given person, because that little girl that's on her lap is the actual really important part of this process here, right? And it is hard inside of all the stuff that's happened not to reach out and try to help, not to try to be more, not to give more and more of yourself to different people. And so I encourage you to set boundaries around how much you're going to help. I'm not saying don't help. Set the boundaries. Find ways to streamline your interactions. Do care about everybody, but you can't care about everybody all the time. To care about yourself too. Keep yourselves healthy. Okay? Thank you, everybody. That's the end of the sort of formal part of this talk. We're right down to the 15-minute mark, so I hope to leave 15 minutes for conversation or discussion at the end. So if anybody has any questions.
Did we want people to put their hands up or put the question in the chat?
I think the chat is probably the easiest. It avoids the whole, can you hear my microphone? Can you hear me? Part of the conversation. If people really need to explain something complex, then sure, put your hand up. But if we can do questions in the chat room, that usually works out a little bit better. Well, thank you, Chris. I appreciate that. Thanks, JC. Any comments or questions that anybody has? Any thoughts? Anything they want to go back to? Anything they'd like to challenge? I'm always up for a good argument. Oh, that's very kind, Leanne. Thank you. It's certainly part of the conversation. That equity, you know, it's funny. Maha Bali, who I mentioned earlier, has a slide that she uses that I stole. I did put it in this talk, but I stole, that says, you know, that you've got that classic picture with the fence, and you've got the 3 kids, and one of them is this tall, and one of them is this tall, and one of them is this tall. And we're having the equity and equality. So equity is, or equality is, you're all access to the same fence, and equity is that we give the shorter person the taller post to stand on. What Maha will say is there's a step beyond that, which is, maybe I don't want to see over the fence. Why are you making me look over the fence in the first place? And I think that at that point, we really do need to draw back and ask ourselves, not just have we given everybody the same equity of opportunity, but also have we thought about why we're making them do it in the first place? And so, yes, that is definitely part of UDL. Thank you, Emmanuel. The only thing I can think of is that change, even if it means something better or positive, is scary. Oh, dude, I couldn't agree with you more. It's terrifying. And it is for everybody, right? It's terrifying for you. And the tendency for some people, and I mean, I have to say I've been surprised at the people who have chosen this path and the people who haven't, is to totally double down and try to do the same thing they were doing before, right? As a response to that challenge. And some people are willing to confront that, but in all cases, I think what you need to do is remember that, remove the fence. Is to remember that that's the same way that your participants are feeling, right? It's the same way everybody is feeling right now. I think another challenge can be when you have some students attending in person and others asynchronously. Oh yeah, making sure you don't lose the interstitial moments with those you don't see. It's super tough. So one of the ways of teaching, one of the words that's used to explain this, I'm going to go ahead and turn off my presentation here. So you have the terrible misfortune of staring at my face, is high flex. Right? I'm not a huge fan, frankly, but I understand that it's necessary in some circumstances. it is very, very difficult to play to the room and play to the people at home, right? The only advice I have for people is to watch late night comedy shows. I know that sounds weird, but they've been doing it for 50 years, right? So if you think of, depending on your age, Johnny Carson, or Stephen Colbert, if you watch them, Jimmy Fallon is a great example. You seriously do that, Julia? That's fantastic. Yeah, so watch what they do. They look to the camera, they look to the other person, they look back to, they play to the crowd, but they're always inclusive. They're always talking basically to the people at home, right? More than not, they're talking to the people at home. The people who are there still get that inside feeling. They still get that feeling that they're attending something. And I think, I mean, I wouldn't exactly model, I'm not suggesting you go out and build a game show out of your classroom, but I think that there's a lot to learn from people who have been doing this for decades now, right? I think it's so great that Julia does that. I really need to know this child's name now. Whoever that is, I need you to tell me what the child's name is, because it's I've been very much enjoying seeing them appear in the screen. That is a super cute kid. Eduardo. Hi, Eduardo. Excellent. I don't know if I missed any questions. Does anybody else have any other comments or? Oh, okay. The 3 best resources for online teaching. What are the 3 best resources for online teaching? I'm sorry to answer your question with a question, but what do you mean by resource? Are we talking about like tools or like content spaces? I don't know. I'll riff on that, and you can tell me in the chat room what you're clearly. Wow. Could be anything you would suggest or turn to if you're dealing with someone new to this. Okay, I'll give you one example. One of the tools I get the most usage out of is Google Slides. So it's not something that people think of as a collaborative tool, but it is an absolutely excellent tool. So Google, everybody can have access to it. You can certainly use the Office 365 tool if you wish to, but Google Slides is accessible to people. You can create one and just allow everybody else to use it so they don't need accounts. But what it allows you to do, let's say you're teaching 20 people. You can give them each a slide and have them work in that slide and have them all work together. Their work gets kept separate, but then they're building your slide deck that you can then use to review what people are doing. So I find Google Slides a great way of having a whole bunch of people work together in a way that keeps that work organized and allows you to effectively interact with it. So that's a tool I get a lot of usage out of. That website is maybe a little bit more intense, but certainly I live and die by Twitter, I'm afraid. I know lots of people don't like it, and there are certainly things there that that are not as pleasant. But so for instance, I've been working I've been thinking a lot lately about how people are feeling about cheating inside of schools. And so I asked a question on Twitter yesterday. Well, actually, even just the poll that you guys saw, right? That's me using Twitter. And again, it takes a while to get started, to find people and stuff, but I find that Twitter can be a really, really useful way of learning and keeping up to date. This question that I posted on Twitter has led to a variety of discussions about cheating and how it works in our environment right now. that I found a really rich discussion and was really great for me to learn different things about different people's perspectives on that. So that's 2. From your experiences, what kind of breakout activity worked best for a group of us at the beginning of a session? Okay, so I have 7 minutes. I'm gonna really dig into that question because I think it's a super important one. So if I imagine a breakout activity that's going to be super useful for people, I think of it as a scaffolding arc, right? So I want to do a couple of things before they break out. I want to have 1 or 2 group activities that allows them to warm up the language that they're going to need in that breakout environment. I want to build the language they're going to need. So if I need to go over some concepts or whatever else, all that work has to be done ahead of time. In an ideal situation, I would have students reading something and delivering an assignment before the synchronous activity, like 2 days before or whatever. So a reading, an activity, they would show up to class. I develop the language. I set the tone. And I think it's super important the way that you speak before you send people in a breakout room online, because whatever tone you take on is the one that people are going to tend to take, right? So if you're quite terse and distant, or you're very formal, then your discussion groups more than likely are going to start taking on those tones. So the friendliness, I think, is a really important piece. But so I would do a chat room response, like we've done chat room responses here. I would have a write-on slide where I would have people develop their thoughts about something. I'd have them, then I send them to a breakout. And I said about the Google Slides earlier, that's how I have each group keep their notes. So I share that Google Slide deck with them. And then they each group goes to a Google Slide and keeps their notes or whatever question or work they're supposed to do or whatever. And then when we come back out of the breakout groups, I share that Google Slide inside of the live synchronous place so that we can talk about what happened in each room. So to me, it's that whole arc that needs to happen in order for it to be effective. And you've got to take more time to do it. I would also, just as a quick note, suggest that you don't try to shape the groups. I know it's better because there are reasons for people to be in different groups, but having people self-select groups on the internet is a total nightmare. And you doing it where you sort of stop and you shift people into groups and whatever else takes too much time. I would say give up on it and just send people into random groups. It's not perfect, but it's better than all the wasted time and the effort. I think you're better off just letting it go. It's fairly related to teaching, but my team did team building in a virtual escape room. I get it, where the room is there. It's a really interesting concept that I never really thought of before. It is really cool. I haven't done one of those before. It's a good idea though. I know I was, I know somebody who spent 6 months building one once. It was terrible, but it took a lot of staff time. They're hard to do. We're down to 3 minutes. Oh yeah, we're down to 3 minutes, my friends. I'm gonna thank you guys and thank you for your participation and your engagement. Eduardo, I hope you have a fantastic day. And for the rest of you, I hope you do too. I hope it's not frozen in Montreal right now. I'm in Windsor, Ontario, one of the warmest places in Canada. Sorry, Montreal's just about to hit its winter. I'm from northern New Brunswick, by the way, so I know what it's like to be cold. I just moved here a couple of years ago. Yeah, I wish you well. I wish you good luck. I say stay safe and be good to yourselves, okay? Take care, everybody.
Thank you so much, Dave, for reminding us that we now need to be more flexible with everybody who is suddenly differently different.
Suddenly differently different.
And the other bottom line that I would like to underline here as a reminder for myself, maybe it'll help others too, is to remember that powerful design emerges from messiness.
Yes.
That was really inspiring. And I thank you for bringing all this wisdom. Now, I think Yannick wanted to share where the link is going to be posted for the recording of this for those who want to go back.
Yes, thank you, Marian and Dave. So the link will be shared on YouTube. You can follow the channel or You can subscribe to our channel so you'll be notified when the video comes out. But yeah, as soon as the webinar is done, I'll try to upload it. And thanks again, Dave.
Bravo.
And thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Cheers.
Thank you, Dave. Really appreciate it.
Oh, and thank you, translators, for your wonderful translation.
Thank
I
you,
love your
everyone.
backgrounds. It made me laugh.
And follow us on Facebook, says Gilda, one of the translators. Don't forget, that's in the chat as well. Follow us on social media. We're so hip these days.